Most mornings, I'm awake before the rest of the world bothers to be. By the time the sky over the east field turns the color of weak tea, I've already been out an hour, boots wet to the ankle, coffee gone cold in the truck cup holder. The Sutton farm doesn't wait for daylight, and after 26 years, neither do I. I check the fence line my father swore he'd fix back when I was 30, the one I finally welded myself. I count the cattle. I run the numbers in a ledger nobody else has ever opened. The land knows my footsteps. That's not poetry, it's just true. People assume a woman alone can't hold 300 acres together. They're wrong. I've buried wells, birthed calves at 2 in the morning, and paid the property taxes out of my own account for 9 straight years, while everyone else forgot the bill existed. The farm isn't where I live, it's who I am. I know every gate that sticks, every culvert that floods, and every acre that drinks more than it gives. My younger sister, Ashley, was the one they framed and hung on the wall. Every holiday, my mother, Linda, would steer the conversation to Ashley's promotions, Ashley's house, Ashley's husband Chad, and his opinions about wine. My father, Bill, would nod along like a man watching his own highlight reel. When I mentioned the new irrigation system I'd installed, my mother would smile politely and ask if anyone wanted more pie. It wasn't cruelty, exactly. It was just the shape the family had always taken. Ashley in the light, me holding the ladder. As children, her spelling bee ribbon went on the refrigerator, my 4-H trophies went into a box in the barn. I stopped expecting applause around the time I learned to drive the tractor. You learn, eventually, that some people will never name what you do, no matter how loudly the work speaks. So I let the work speak, and I kept quiet. Quiet was safer. Quiet was mine. The only one who ever truly saw me was my grandfather, Hank. He had hands like cracked leather, and a way of going silent before he said something that mattered. He taught me to read the weather in the cottonwoods, to test soil by feel, to never sign anything I hadn't read twice. We'd sit on the tailgate at dusk, and he'd look out over the fields like a man taking inventory of his own heart. This place, he told me once, the summer before he passed, goes to the one who loves it, not the one who's owed it. Love it, Susie, and it'll keep you. I thought he was being sentimental. Old men get that way near the end. I didn't understand that Hank never said anything he didn't intend to act on. I buried him on the hill behind the barn, under the oak he planted the year my mother was born. After that, the family's language about the farm changed in a way I almost didn't notice. It became, or property. It became, the estate. At Thanksgiving, my father referred to what the land's worth these days. The way you discuss a stock you were thinking of dumping, Ashley started saying, when we sell, instead of, F. They spoke about the farm the way people speak about a relative they're already dividing up in their heads. And every time, they looked right past me. The one standing in the kitchen who'd actually kept the lights on. They assumed I was a caretaker, a fixture, furniture that fed the chickens. Worse, they had convinced themselves that ignoring me was a kind of generosity. I never corrected them. Not once. Partly because I'd learned that correcting this family only made them louder, and partly because of something Hank had handed me years before. Something I'd folded away in a drawer and tried hard not to think about. They were so certain the farm was theirs to decide on, so comfortable in that certainty that it never once occurred to them to check. And I let them stay comfortable, because I already knew something they didn't, something with my grandfather's signature on it, waiting in the dark of a locked drawer for the day they'd finally force me to open it. The text came through on a Tuesday, at 6:42 in the evening, while I was washing dish soap off my hands. My phone buzzed on the windowsill. The family group chat, the one I'd muted years ago to keep my own peace. I almost ignored it. Then I saw the photo. It was my house. My porch, my hanging baskets, the barn behind it catching the last of the light. Across the top, in the cheerful font of a real estate app, were 2 words that stopped my breath, solid pattern. Beneath it, a caption from Ashley. Closing in 30 days? So proud of this family. I stood there with the water running, reading it again and again, waiting for the words to rearrange into something that made sense. They didn't. Somewhere in a thread I'd been left on by accident, my family had just sold the ground I was standing on, and they'd added a party emoji. These were the people I had fed at every Thanksgiving. I didn't call anyone that night. I scrolled up and up through months of messages I'd never been meant to see. The plan went back further than I could have guessed. There were photos of a developer's brochure, Crestline Development, luxury rural estates. And a man named Mark Bennett CC'd on emails my father had forwarded with the note. Looks fair to me. There was a spreadsheet. My stomach turned when I understood what it was. The proceeds, split 3 ways. Bill and Linda, Kevin, Ashley and Chad. 3 columns of numbers, neat as fence posts. And then, near the bottom, a line that took the air out of me. My mother had written, "We'll help Susan find an apartment in town so she lands softly." It's the kind thing to do. Find an apartment, land softly. As if I were a housegeist who'd overstayed, and not the woman who'd kept the well from running dry through 2 draughts. They hadn't forgotten me. That was the part that hurt. They'd remembered me just enough to plan my removal. I gave myself one day. Then I drove to my parents' house, where I knew they'd gathered. Ashley's SUV in the driveway, Kevin's rental beside it. They were at the dining table with coffee, and the brochure spread out like a treasure map. The conversation stopped when I walked in, the way it always did. My father recovered first. "Susie, we were going to talk to you. Were you?" I said. I kept my voice level. I'd learned long ago that the moment I raised it, they'd stop hearing me and start managing me. I asked simple questions. Who had they listed it with? What did the contract say? Had anyone actually checked who held title? Ashley laughed, not cruelly, just lightly, the way you laugh at a child asking why the sky stays up. "Susie, sweetheart," she said, "you just live here. Dad and Mom are the ones who—" "I just live here," I repeated. Nobody corrected her. My mother reached over and patted my hand and said they'd make sure I was taken care of. And that was when I understood that no argument I made at that table would land. They were a wall, and walls don't reason. So I stopped talking. I told them I needed time to think, and I left while they were still explaining how generous they were being. I didn't cry on the drive home. I was past that. I was somewhere colder and clearer. Back in my kitchen, I pulled out a chair, sat in the quiet, and let myself remember the thing I'd spent years not thinking about. Hank's drawer. The old roll-top desk in the spare room, the bottom drawer that stuck unless you lifted as you pulled. I went and opened it. Beneath a stack of his seed catalogs and a folded flag was a manila envelope, soft at the corners from age, my name written across it in his blocky hand, Susie. Inside were 2 things. A document, folded in thirds, heavy paper with the gray ink of something official. And a letter, sealed, with 1 line on the front in Hank's writing. "Open this when they try to take it." My hands were steady as I lifted the document into the light. The paper was older than the betrayal, older than the brochure, older than every smug column in that spreadsheet. They had 30 days. And I had something they'd never once thought to look for. I didn't open Hank's sealed letter. Not yet. Whatever he'd written, I wanted to face it knowing the facts first, the way he'd taught me. Never sign anything you haven't read twice. And never believe a thing just because you want it to be true. So the next morning I drove to the county building downtown, the document folded in my coat pocket, and asked the clerk at the recorder's office how a person checks who owns a piece of land. She didn't blink. She pulled up the parcel by its number, the same number printed on our tax bills for years, and turned the monitor toward me. There was the chain of title, laid out plain as a fence line, every transfer, every date, every name, recorded and stamped and public. I read down the column slowly. My grandfather's name. Then a date 9 years back. Then a name after that. And what I saw made me sit down in the little plastic chair beside her desk and breathe. I had her print it. But a printout wasn't enough. I'd spent my whole life being told I'd misunderstood, that I was confused, that I'd gotten the wrong end of something. I wasn't going to walk into that family on a feeling. So I found a lawyer. Karen Whitfield. An estate attorney 2 towns over, with gray hair and reading glasses. I laid the document and the printout on her desk and asked her one question: who owns the farm? She read for a long time without speaking. Then she set the papers down and folded her hands. "Whoever recorded this," she said, "did it correctly. Signed, notarized, witnessed, and filed. A properly recorded deed transfers ownership the day it's executed. It doesn't wait for anyone to die. It isn't part of an estate. It can't be willed away by people who never held title." I asked the question underneath the question. Could my parents sell it? "They can sign whatever they like," she said. "But you can't sell what isn't yours. The moment a buyer runs a title search, this surfaces. My advice: say nothing. Let the record speak for you. Say nothing." After a lifetime of saying nothing, it turned out silence was finally on my side. So I let them work. It was the strangest thing, watching a betrayal build itself while I held the one fact that would bring it down. I went to the family dinner I'd skipped. I passed the potatoes. I listened to Chad explain the closing timeline as if he understood land, and to my father describe the sale as the smart play at our age, and to my mother say the farm had always been a burden. I understood them better than they knew. Bill was tired and afraid of money. Linda wanted the version of the family where everything looked clean from the road. Ashley and Chad were drowning in a lifestyle they couldn't afford, and Kevin just wanted his third without having to drive out and earn it. None of them were monsters. That was the hard part. They were ordinary people who had quietly decided that the easiest thing was also the right thing, because it benefited them. They signed the listing. They accepted the buyer's deposit. Ashley posted a sunset photo captioned, "End of an era," and I said nothing at all. The call came 11 days later. I know because I'd started counting, not the days until closing, but the days until the truth tripped the wire I knew was waiting. It was my father, and his voice was thin in a way I'd never quite heard from him. "Susie?" he said. "Something's come up with the title company. There's a problem with the paperwork." I asked what kind of problem, keeping my voice flat. He didn't fully know. All he knew was that the title officer, a woman named Donna Price, had called the buyer, and the buyer had called the agent, and now everyone was asking the same question. The recorded owner wasn't Bill. It wasn't Linda. It wasn't Kevin or Ashley. The search had come back with a name none of them expected, and the closing had ground to a halt. "They won't tell us whose name it is," my father said. "They say we have to come in?" I already knew. But I let the silence stretch, and I said, "Then you'd better go find out." They wanted me to come to the title company with them, all of us together, as if I were a witness and not the answer. I went, but not to explain. I went to watch their faces. Donna Price slid a single page across the table, and my father put on his glasses, and my mother leaned in, and Ashley craned to read over Chad's shoulder. It was the recorded deed. At the top, in the flat language of the county, was the date, 9 years back, the summer before Hank passed, and below it, in black and white, the grantor and the grantee. Henry Sutton to Susan Sutton, a warranty deed, signed in his hand, notarized, witnessed, filed at the courthouse the very same week, recorded in a book and a page number anyone could have found, if anyone had ever thought to look. My grandfather hadn't promised me the farm. He had given it to me, legally and completely, 9 years ago, and then he'd kept his silence as carefully as I'd kept mine. That night, I finally broke the seal on his letter. I read it at the kitchen table, and his voice came off the page as clear as if he were sitting across from me. "Susie," he wrote. "If you're reading this, they've come for the land, the way I always feared they would. I watched this family my whole life. I watched them praise your sister for breathing, and treat you like the help. But I also watched who showed up at 5 in the morning when the cattle were sick. I watched who paid the taxes she thought I didn't notice. The others love what the farm is worth. You love what it is. So I gave it to you while I still had the right to choose, and I did it quietly, because if I'd announced it, they'd have spent my last years fighting me, and I wanted those years in peace. Don't feel guilty. You didn't take anything. You were given something you'd already earned 100 times over. Stand your ground. The land knows you. So do I. I read it 3 times. Then I let myself cry, not from grief this time, but from the strange, late relief of finally being seen. The family's reaction arrived in stages, and I could have predicted every one. First came denial. My father called the next morning insisting there'd been a mistake at the county, that someone must have filed the wrong form. Then, when Karen confirmed otherwise, came the accusation. Ashley's voice on the phone turned to acid. I had manipulated a dying old man. I'd isolated Grandpa. I'd taken advantage. It would have been funny if it weren't so familiar. The same family that ignored me for 30 years, suddenly certain I'd masterminded a conspiracy from a tractor seat. The deposit had to be returned. The buyer walked. Crestline's lawyers sent a letter about a failure to deliver clear title, and the 3 neat columns of that spreadsheet quietly turned to dust. And then came the warmth. My mother, who'd planned my eviction in a group chat, called to say how much they all loved me, how we were still family, how surely we could work something out as a family. I'd seen this turn before. I knew exactly what it was worth. I didn't shout. I didn't call any of them back. Instead, I did the one thing they'd never expected me to do. I answered through Karen. A few days later, each of them received a certified letter, the kind you have to sign for. It stated, in plain legal language, that I was the sole recorded owner of the farm, that any agreement to sell it was void, and that I would be making decisions about the property going forward. No insults. Just the facts on letterhead, impossible to argue with. Then I made one more request, mine, not Karen's. I asked them to come to the farm on Sunday, to the porch. All of them. Not to negotiate, I told my father. To listen. He went quiet, and for the first time in my life, I heard my family run out of words. They would come. And on Sunday, on my porch, on my land, I would finally have mine. Sunday came clear and bright, the kind of morning Hank would have called a working day. They arrived in a loose, uncertain line. My father first, then my mother, then Kevin, then Ashley and Chad lagging at the back like children sent to the principal. I'd set out chairs on the porch and a pitcher of iced tea, because I am not my family, and I do not make people stand in the heat to be told the truth. Nobody touched the tea. I waited until they were seated, and then I stayed standing, which felt right. I asked you here, I said, so you'd hear it from me and not a lawyer. The farm is mine. It has been for 9 years. Grandpa Hank signed it over to me before he died, the right way, and it's recorded at the county for anyone to read. There's nothing to negotiate, because there's nothing here that belongs to any of you to sell. My father opened his mouth. I lifted one hand, not unkindly. I'm not finished, I said, and for once they let me speak. What I told them next wasn't revenge, it was arithmetic. The deposit, $40,000, had to be returned to Crestline, and since Ashley and Chad had already put their share toward their debts, that money would have to come out of my parents' savings. Bill's face went gray as he did the math he should have done months before. The sale that was going to rescue them had instead cost them, because the farm had never been theirs. Word travels in a county like ours. By the time the leaves turned, everyone at the feed store and the diner knew the Suttons had tried to sell land they didn't own, out from under the one daughter who'd actually worked it. Cliff Morgan, our neighbor, stopped me at the co-op just to shake my hand. Nobody was going to jail, assuming isn't a crime. But they lost their money, their leverage, and the comfortable story they'd always told about themselves. The bill for 30 years of looking past me had finally come due, and this time I wasn't the one paying it. They tried. After that, my mother started calling again, her voice soft and wounded, talking about putting it all behind us. Ashley sent a long message about how sisters shouldn't let money come between them, as if money were the thing that had come between us and not a lifetime of her standing in my light. I didn't scream at them. I didn't need to. I'm not going to pretend none of it happened. I told my mother, you plan to sell my home and move me into an apartment to make your life easier for yourselves. I can forgive that someday, but I won't forget it, and I won't act like it didn't happen so you can feel comfortable. I left the door open. Just a crack, and only for whoever was willing to walk through it honestly. Respect first. Then maybe, in time, the rest. I would not trade my peace to spare them the discomfort of what they'd done. This morning, I was up before the sun again, the way I always am. I walked the east field with my coffee, checked the fence I'd welded with my own hands, and climbed the hill behind the barn to where Hank rests under his oak. I told him it was done. I told him the land was safe, and so was I. If you've ever been the quiet one, the one who did the work nobody named, the one a family was sure would never push back, then you already know how this feels. It isn't loud. It's just a long, deep breath you've waited years to take. They underestimated me my whole life, and in the end, that was their mistake, not mine. Thank you for staying with me through all of it. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you believe the truth finds the right person in the end, subscribe and stay a while. There are more stories like this one, and I'd be glad to tell them to you.